one of the leading employment law experts in the state, Stephen Ellis, who's with local Burlington law firm Paul Frank and Collins. Stephen's highly regarded in the state of Vermont in employment law and a whole bunch of other areas. He's a seasoned trial lawyer, appellate advocate, arbitrator, mediator. Been doing this sort of thing for well over 30 years with both private and municipal clients in Vermont, New York, and other states as well. His practice, from what I understand, focuses on professional liability, intellectual property, labor and employment law, corporate governance, workers' compensation, insurance law, and the list goes on. Stephen, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon and sharing some insights with us on what credit unions as employers should be thinking about as employees do or don't get vaccinated, and what the workplace might look like in the future, and whatever comes to mind, whatever questions come up. So thank you, Stephen, for joining us.
It's my pleasure, and thanks for having me. Can everybody hear me okay? I can see about half of you, and the other half of you I can't see you, and you're muted, so I guess that's as it should be.
Well, I can hear you and I can see you, and unlike me, you are not green, so all is a go on your end.
No, you're not green anymore either. I don't know what happened
Oh.
there. It was that shade of green that everything turned on the Simpsons when Homer, grabbed the cooling rods and took them home with him in his lunchbox. But well, it's nice to be with you this afternoon. I know it's a beautiful afternoon, and I commend all of you for taking some of your time to think about these things. As Joe noted, I've been doing this for a long time, and one of the things that I've certainly learned is you folks with your boots on the ground often have more insights about what's going on in some of these areas than I do. I get called upon to answer specific questions from time to time, and I do try to keep myself up to date on the law, but it's, as they say, you can't make this stuff up. The things that you guys encounter on a day-to-day basis are sometimes things that just simply can't be anticipated, and we do our best to work through them when they come along. We've all had at this point, well over a year to kind of adjust ourselves to the realities of the COVID environment in the workplace. And there have been a lot of adjustments. A lot of them were very early on. I know that, back a year ago, I was fielding calls on multiple times a day from some of your members just to try to get caught up with the legislation, the regulations, the science, best practices. And there was a real flurry of real focused attention on those issues. My sense is by July or thereabouts, people were pretty much adjusting to the HR fundamentals. I mean, obviously you can't anticipate everything that's going to come up from day to day. And some of the biggest challenges were dealing with the PPP loans and the payroll tax credits and things of that nature. By and large, most of those things have been exhausted, although some of it, I guess, was carried over into this year. But the immediate issue is vaccines. And so we'll talk about that a little bit. I've got a slideshow, and I'm always a little reluctant. I don't know if you'd rather look at my slides, or if you'd rather look at my face in my office, but we'll put up some of the slides just to try to guide the discussion. And maybe at some point I'll just turn off the slideshow so that we can remember that we're actually real people here. But let me see. Can everybody see my slides?
You're
Awesome.
good. It looks like we can see it.
Awesome. Well, I can see you and my slides. I wonder what's going to happen if I actually start the slideshow. But yeah, now I can just see my slides. So let me see if I can do something about that. Yeah, okay. So can you see the slides? Wonderful. I can see everybody on the slides. So you know, the issues that have come up over the past year, initially there were some issues, you know, involving what do we do about employees not wanting to come to work because they're afraid to come to work? What do we do about employees who are wondering whether they need to quarantine or whether they are allowed to quarantine? What do we do about employees who are now having childcare challenges related to school closures or family members having the virus or being quarantined for one reason or another? You know, we worked our way through all of those issues. What do we do about contact tracing? Do we have to do the contact tracing, or what do we do about that? And I think we all learned that no, we don't have to do the contact tracing. The state of Vermont is going to do the contact tracing. We have to provide information when we're provided when we're notified that somebody has tested positive. But generally, we're going to get notified by the Department of Health if somebody has tested positive. What kind of medical information can we require from our employees? Can we require them to provide medical certification that they're actually getting tested or that they actually have tested positive? Even if we can require that information, do we really want to? Do we really need to? How rigorous do we want to be really about policing this whole thing? And I think most of us kind of settled on a policy of not being overly aggressive with trying to police these issues. There just doesn't seem to be any real upside to to just challenging employees if they're telling you that they're out because they have a family member who's tested positive. Do you really want to be requiring medical certifications in all of these instances, or do you want to just kind of take your employees' word for it? And particularly if they're going to be getting paid sick time, and if you're going to be getting payroll tax credits for paying them for that. There just didn't seem to be a lot of reason to be overly aggressive in policing that. And I think we're kind of coming around to the same perspective on the question of vaccines as we're getting into the era where almost everybody's at least can get vaccinated at some point in the near future if they want to be. We're starting to face maybe some more interesting questions around that. We'll get to that in a minute. You know, as with many things with employment law, it's always a question of balancing competing interests. And there's usually no clear winning path for the employer. It's usually a question of, you know, how bad trouble do you want to be in here? You're already, or what's the best way to avoid the worst trouble? And I think when I teach seminars on legal issues, I always try to get back and focus on the basic principles that are trying to be furthered by the law. And I think it's helpful to do that when we're looking at COVID issues as well. You know, there's a number of separate issues that are trying to be balanced here, and we're trying to find the right way to balance these different considerations. One, of course, is safety, the safety of our workplace, the safety of our customers, the safety of our employees. Another competing issue that goes up against that is privacy, the privacy of our employees. You know, how intrusive do we really want to be in asking for information about their medical conditions or their vaccination status? We're also trying to foster harmony in the workplace. We don't want our employees sniping at each other. You know, we want them to get along. We want to have an efficient workplace. We want to have people working harmoniously and efficiently with each other, not getting in each other's way. And there's these issues of equity that we're being asked now to look at. We've been asked to look at these issues for decades, but it seems that now we're really being pressed to look at these issues seriously with some real focus. Are our policies and practices equitable? Are we doing things are we proactively addressing equity issues in the workplace, or are we waiting for somebody to challenge us and then trying to defend ourselves, trying to justify what we're doing? And of course, the guidance, as we've been getting with, for example, ADA law for over a decade now, is we shouldn't be asking so much, does this person really have a disability that qualifies for protection under the ADA? The question that the law wants us to be asking is, whatever this person's condition is, can it be reasonably accommodated? And is the accommodation that they're asking for something that really is or isn't going to create an undue hardship in the workplace? And if it can be accommodated without creating an undue hardship, then we probably ought to be accommodating them. Just as a matter of, even if it's not a matter of legal requirement, it's going to create harmony in the workplace. It's going to foster efficiency. It's going to improve employee morale, and it's going to keep us out of trouble. Of course, there is the rule that we talk about in employment law, the rule number 1, that no good deed goes unpunished. And you are going to bump up against that. When you provide accommodations to one employee, are you setting now a precedent that somebody else is going to claim they're entitled to as well? On the equity issues, though, and I'm going to wait to focus on this for a few minutes, because I have a couple of scenarios that I think will help us really think about these issues. But I think one of the things that the pandemic really has done is it's kind of revealed some structural issues and really brought them right out on the surface in ways that maybe previously we were able to kind of ignore them or pretend that the issues weren't there. Some of those issues have been really badly exacerbated. For example, pay equity for women. There's data that suggests that by and large across the economy, women have been set back decades by the pandemic. The gains that they've made over the past several decades in certain occupations have been lost because women were disproportionately, the occupations that were affected primarily by the pandemic were occupations that were held primarily by women. Being out of the workforce makes it harder to get back into the workforce. The reasons that people were taken out of the workforce with childcare responsibilities, caregiving responsibilities, those are issues that have not necessarily resolved. So this is an issue that we need to address, and we're either going to address it proactively as employers, or we're going to find ourselves on the receiving end of claims that we're discriminating against people. And I don't think those claims are too far down the road. They're already starting to materialize. So mandatory vaccinations, this is where we are. This is the issue du jour. Can we require our employees to get vaccinated? Well, technically, yes, you can. But do you really want to have that as an absolute requirement? And if you do have it, are you really prepared to be firing employees who refuse to get vaccinated? Is that really where you want to be going? So I think that the general wisdom now seems to be that even though technically you probably can require people to be vaccinated as a condition of returning to work, you probably shouldn't. And there are some legal there are some areas where you can. You have to accommodate genuine religious objections, and you have to accommodate genuine medical conditions that would preclude somebody from being vaccinated, or that would put them at risk. Beyond that, though, there are some other considerations that we'll get to in a minute. And of course, I think hopefully we all know this, that even if you do require your employees to provide evidence that they've been vaccinated, that's all you can get. You're not entitled to get any other medical information from them about, including whether or not they had the virus, whether or not they're exposed to the virus, whether or not anybody else in their household has the virus. If you're going to require them to get vaccinated, you can require them to provide proof that they've been vaccinated, and that's it. I don't know any employers who are, well, let me take that back. I do know some employers who are requiring employees to provide evidence that they've been vaccinated. I haven't seen a case yet where somebody has been contemplating disciplining an employee who refuses to be vaccinated, or I actually have seen a case where an employee claimed to have taken time off to get vaccinated, and it turned out that's not what they were doing at all, and they never did get vaccinated, and that's another issue. So, what are the pros and cons of having a vaccination program? And the thinking is you should have a vaccination program. What should it involve? It should involve encouraging your employees to be vaccinated, and incentivizing them to be vaccinated. Why? Because it's going to keep your workforce healthy in the long run. It's going to reduce absences due to illness. It's going to foster productivity and efficiency in the workplace. Ultimately, we would hope it's going to improve morale. If at some point you've got a critical mass of employees who have been vaccinated. What are the cons? Frankly, other than having to deal with employees who don't want to get vaccinated for one reason or another, I can't see any real downside to having a program that encourages employees to get the vaccine if it's available to them. And these programs can run a gamut. It's very helpful, and I imagine a lot of you are doing this already, or your company is doing this, providing information, providing resources to your employees about the safety, efficacy, and availability of the vaccine. Some employers, larger employers, are providing on-site vaccinations or facilitating vaccinations at an off-site location. Certainly, a lot of employers are providing assistance to their employees in scheduling their vaccinations, and particularly when if you were trying to get a vaccination from one of the pharmacies, Walgreens or CVS, I think what an ordeal that can be to try to how many phone calls you have to make, how long do you have to stay on the website trying to get an appointment. A number of employers that I work with have actually provided assistance to employees in scheduling their vaccines. Usually that has to be an employee who already has access to the employee's personal health information. So it would be the HR person who handles that aspect of the HR function. But employers who have the ability to free somebody up to provide that kind of assistance, I know it's been very much appreciated by the employees. Providing flexibility, and if the only time you can get in for a vaccine is tomorrow at 2:00 in the afternoon, otherwise you're going to have to wait 3 weeks to get your first dose. If you can let them go at 2:00 tomorrow afternoon to get that vaccine, do it. It'll be appreciated. It'll get your employees vaccinated sooner rather than later. If they have available paid time off, you can let them use it for that purpose. Some employers are even paying employees for the time off, regardless of whether they have accrued paid time off, simply because they want to encourage people to get vaccinated. Some employers are actually providing transportation and childcare to help employees get their vaccines. Obviously, not every employer can do all of these things. It's a lot easier for big employers with big workforces to provide higher levels of assistance. It's a lot harder for small employers, many of which may not even have anybody with a designated HR function, and it's already difficult. I think most of the credit unions I work with seem to be pretty well staffed in terms of HR, having at least somebody full-time available. But I can see how it would be difficult to find somebody with the time to free up to actually assist employees in scheduling their vaccines. So This is something that some employers are doing. Obviously, not everybody can. Other incentives, should you be offering prizes? I mean, I think generally there's probably a lot of reasons not to do that. First of all, you don't necessarily want to be have a program that's going to be publicizing, or encouraging people to publicize whether or not they've received the vaccine. There's also a point at which, and this has not yet been tested, but there's a point at which if you are doing too much to actually sponsor the vaccine, are you assuming liability for that vaccine? If somebody has a bad side effect, or if somebody, for example, gets in a car accident on the way to get their vaccine. At what point does this become an employer-sponsored function for purposes of assuming workers' comp liability? A question that's been coming up a lot is, hey, once our workforce has reached a critical mass of being fully vaccinated, can we stop doing everything else? Do we still have to do the social distancing, the masking, the cleaning down of work surfaces, and allowing people to work remotely? And the guidance that we're getting now from the CDC and the Vermont Department of Health is, yes, you still need to do all those things for the time being. At some point, maybe it won't be necessary, but as long as there's still numbers of cases, out in the general population, the guidance, and again, we don't know, we're never going to get to 100% vaccinated in our workplaces. And as long as that's the case, there's every reason why we ought to continue practicing these precautions. But, at some point, we're going to be fully reopened, as they say. And I think most employers now have reopening plans. Obviously, the best laid plans. But I think most employers have now dates when they're projecting that they're going to be fully reopened, whatever that's going to look like, and they're thinking about what that's going to look like. My own view is it's never going to look like it looked before. There are things that have changed because of the pandemic that are never going to go back to the way that they were before. How much will? I think nobody really knows. And the biggest issue is I think remote workers and remote work. In the credit unions, most of your staff have to be there. I mean, your tellers certainly have to be there to do their jobs. But there are employees who maybe can be working remotely. Are we going to allow them to continue to work remotely even when it's no longer part of a pandemic response plan, simply because they've gotten used to working remotely? We found that it seems to work okay and it's good for employee morale. Or is that going to be creating tensions in our workforce between people who are allowed to work remotely and people who aren't? Or even people who are being told now, well, because you can work remotely, I'm expecting you to work even when you've got, for example, childcare responsibilities or caregiving responsibilities that before maybe you would have been getting family leave for that reason. But now, because you can work remotely, I'm going to expect you to work remotely because you can. So these are all new issues. I think people who have a lot invested in fancy professional office space in the big cities are kind of wondering what's going to happen with that office space now. I know a lot of big firms are planning to cut back on their office space because so many employees are simply going to be, they've learned that their jobs can be done remotely, and there's very little reason why we need to have them coming in. But it's been over a year now since I first started working remotely. I'm actually in my office today in downtown Burlington, But over the past year, I've probably worked from my home office well over half the time. Um, and, you know, I enjoy it. I found that I can do pretty much anything from my home office that I can do from my real office. But you know what? I kind of miss being around people. I miss having my colleagues down the hall. I miss having my assistant right out the door. I miss having lunch with people. You know, I miss the gatherings that we have in our firm when people just kind of catch up with each other. Those things are valuable, you know, and but how valuable are they? Are they so valuable that we're going to pay for, you know, as an employer, that we're going to pay for real estate and office space that we don't really need simply because we want to get together more often? What's going to happen to business travel? You know, I think a lot of people have learned that we can do these things remotely that we used to travel for. And so there's a lot of things that I think it's anybody's guess. It's going to be quite a while before we really know what the new normal is. So I want to talk about, these are some scenarios that have come up in the real world, in my real world, and probably in yours as well. And let's just think about these. I've got a few of these, so we can take as much time as probably we've got to go through some of them. But so let's look at this first one. Employee A reports that employee B was seen drinking in a bar while supposedly in quarantine. So the employee B's not coming to work because they're quarantined for some reason. Has anybody encountered this in their workforce? I know that at least one of you has, or something very close to this. What do we do with that information? Any volunteers? Come on. Do we want to call employee B up and say, hey, what's the deal? You were seen drinking in a bar and you told me that you were home quarantining? Jean, you unmuted yourself.
Okay, unfortunately I did. Yes, that's what I would do. I'd call employee B and say, I'm sorry, but you were seen drinking in a bar while you were supposed to be quarantining.
And what are you going to do if they deny it?
Good point. I don't know. I think I would be probably calling the lawyer after that.
This is one of these situations, and I did get a call about something very similar to this. And it was a little bit more pressing because the issue was the employee was seen drinking in a bar in Nashville and was going to be coming back to work on Monday. And somebody had actually got a cell phone video of this employee drinking in a bar in Nashville. And so the question was, are we going to let them come back to work? And so that creates a new question, because you've got somebody that really needs to be quarantined under the travel restriction deadline. So you've got a real reason to want to have that information. But do you really want to know, do you really want to get involved in this? I mean, maybe you do. It can be an employee honesty issue. But this is, there have been issues of employees really kind of spying on each other and sniping at each other and diming each other out over these kind of things that have created, trying to drag the employer into disputes and credibility contests that maybe you really don't need to get involved in. So, it could be that the appropriate response in this situation is, thank you for providing us with that information. And then wait to see if the employee comes back from their quarantine when they're supposed to come back from their quarantine without any problems, and maybe just let it lie. Because really, if they're okay, if they haven't contracted the virus, if they come back when they're supposed to come back, but the legitimate issue, and here's the other side of that coin, is what if you do let them come back and you haven't investigated it? And now another employee says, you let my coworker come back when they were supposed to be quarantining, and I know that they weren't quarantining, and so now I don't feel safe coming to work. And in fact, I don't think you're providing me with a safe workspace the way you're supposed to do under OSHA. So maybe that's a reason right there why you absolutely need to get to the bottom of this and find out. And it's not for the purpose of policing this employee, it's for the purpose of finding out whether in fact they're going to be permitted to come back to work, right? Whether they in fact have been respecting their quarantine. So, here's another one. Employee B claims employee A is not covering her nose with her mask, and this is creating an unsafe work environment. What do you want to do with this information? Is this something that you really are concerned about as an employer? I'm going to suggest that you are concerned about this, because if you're trying to follow social distancing guidelines to provide a safe workplace for your employees, and you have knowledge that somebody's not observing those guidelines, you really do need to intervene. Now, I don't know anybody that I was not just combing through my recent memory banks. I can't think of a situation where an employee has actually been terminated or disciplined for refusing to, or for failing, for non-compliance with social distancing policies. I do know, I have clients who have had issues with members of the public who are just flat out refusing to comply with masking and social distancing guidelines. So here's another issue that's like the first one. Employee C complains that employee D left work to get vaccinated, but went shopping instead and does not intend to get vaccinated. I would think that this is a situation where you probably want to find out if the employee told you that they were leaving work to get vaccinated and you gave them time off for that purpose, and then you find out that they have no intention of being vaccinated. I think that's a serious issue that you would want to address with your employee. You're going to then get into this issue about, does the employee have a legitimate reason to not want to be vaccinated? And if they don't, and they're simply refusing, what are you going to do about that? Here's an issue that came up very early in the pandemic, quite a bit. An employee stays home from work because she doesn't feel safe going outside. And the employer says, hey, we're following all the CDC guidelines. We're providing you with a safe workplace. You got to come to work. And the employee says, well, the only way I can get there is on the bus, and I just don't feel safe because not everybody on the bus is social distancing. And I don't want to get the pandemic. What do you do with that kind of a situation? I mean, do you say, come to work or you're fired? I know some employers did do that. And the employee obviously now is going to go out on unemployment, and but you're not going to get the payroll tax credit for that employee because they're not on unemployment for legitimate COVID-related reasons. I actually don't know what is the status right now of in Vermont, whether they've reinstated the work search requirement. I don't think they have yet. So I think employees who are out on workers' comp out on unemployment can continue to collect unemployment without having to demonstrate that they're engaged in a good faith job search. But so that's probably, that's what happened to a lot of employees, is they ended up going out on unemployment without any reinstatement rights or anything, simply because they didn't feel safe. And of course, some people would argue it's because they were getting they were making more money on unemployment than they were making at work, and so they didn't see any good reason to come to work. But
Stephen, I don't know, excuse me, I don't know if you have the chat box open, but there's 2 or 3 questions in there that were posted that are kind of related to some of these examples.
Yeah, let me see if I can find the chat box. Hold on a second. Where is that chat box?
There's an icon in the middle of your screen at the bottom that says chat. If you click on that, it should appear on the right-hand side of your window.
Yeah, it's not there. There's,
Well, I can read them to you.
okay, great.
So going back to your prior discussion about incenting people to get vaccinated and whatnot. Somebody asked, do you see more money incentives or others like a paid day off? And I think you address that as far as those are options among others. But do you see a prevalence? I know those are options, but do you see a prevalence of any of those kinds of things, or for the
No,
most part, our
I,
employers
I,
just letting go?
yeah, I haven't seen that there's any kind of a trend towards offering those kind of clear incentives. I know that some, large national and global companies have been offering those kind of incentives, but most employers in Vermont just don't have the resources, I think, to be providing those kind of incentives. And beyond that, there's this other issue of, do you really want to be sponsoring this? It's one thing to be encouraging it, but it's another thing to be subsidizing it in some way, where now you may actually be assuming, and this remains to be tested, what kind of liability might you be assuming? I think, theoretically, there's workers' comp liability there. If there's not workers' comp there liability, I think it would be pretty tough to establish tort liability. Obviously, if there is workers' comp liability, that's the exclusive remedy. But if there's not, that means the employee can sue you. I'm not seeing, a clear path to liability there. I mean, they would have to prove that you were somehow negligent. I can certainly, think of how you would make that claim that, for example, with the J&J vaccine right now, with it being suspended, if you had sponsored somebody getting the J&J vaccine, they developed blood clots, there's at least a theoretical negligence claim there that you knew or should have known that there were risks and you didn't disclose them, you didn't warn your employee, and if it's not a workers' comp injury, then it's a tort claim. But again, we're going to see what happens with some of those legal theories. It's still a little early for us to know how viable they're going to be. I think
Sure.
the workers' comp is pretty clear. If if you sponsored a work activity and somebody gets injured, it's a workers' comp injury.
Can I ask a question about that?
Yep.
So if you give your employees 2 hours to go get the vaccination, is that a sponsorship?
I don't think so. But if you, for example, if you pay them, if they're using accrued paid sick time, right? I think that's one thing. But if you're actually paying people to go get the vaccine when you don't have to, maybe you are sponsoring it. If you're providing transportation, if you're providing rewards or other incentives, I can see an employee making a claim that was an employer-sponsored event, and therefore my injury is arising out of it in the course of my employment. I haven't seen any decisions yet that would clearly reject that kind of a claim. So I don't know what's going to happen with that.
No, thank you.
Yeah.
So another question, Stephen, was, can an employer require masks to be worn only by those employees who have not been vaccinated?
The answer is probably yes. Legally, you probably can.
I sense a but coming along here.
Well, the but is now you're discriminating, right? And is that are you discriminating against somebody on the basis of being in a protected class? I think probably not. But
So it's always one of those cases where you're the unlucky employer who the people who are having to wear masks in your office just happen to be concentrated in one of those protected classes, right? And then you have
Well,
a problem.
that could certainly happen. And in fact, there are some claims that I think people are expecting to come out of this that fall into that category. Uh, for example, if you're a company that occupies professional office space in a big office tower in the center of a city, and all of your professional employees are predominantly non-minority or predominantly male, and all of your support staff who have to maintain the building are predominantly minority. And now the only people that have to come to work are the people in those jobs, and they tend to be predominantly minority, and they have to take public transportation to get to those jobs. And so that's exposing them to different risks. And you're now allowing your professional employees not to come to work because, they don't have to. Is that a form of invidious discrimination against the minorities who are disproportionately occupying the jobs that aren't allowed to work remotely? Or is that something that the employer is going to be able to defend simply by saying, hey, we'd like to let you work remotely, but you can't sweep the floors working remotely, and your job is to sweep the floors. And the fact is, the guy in that beautiful corner office on the 45th floor, he doesn't need to be there. He can do his job just as easily from his vacation house in Cancun. And so we're not discriminating on the basis of your minority status. We're simply allowing remote work to people who are able to work remotely. But this is where I say this has exposed some divisions and stratifications in the workforce that I think are problematical, because there is a disproportionate impact on minorities and women. And what are the legal consequences of that, I think, remains to be seen. I'm encouraging my clients to not view this strictly as a legal challenge, but to view it as kind of a societal challenge that we all need to address, because it's not really in anybody's interest that we have a workforce that is divided and stratified by gender and race and minority status, where the privileges and opportunities are just so blatantly inequitable. That's not a system that ultimately is sustainable. It is something that we ought to be trying to work against to the extent that we can. I think, and that's an important qualification. I know that, as a law firm, we would very much like to have a more diverse attorney staff. But boy, is it hard to recruit to find a diverse applicant pool when we're trying to recruit for those positions. And but it's still something that we aspire to, and it's something that we're looking at right now, because the jobs in our business that tend to be the people that have to come into work tend to be disproportionately female. And do we really want a workforce where that everybody that's in the office is female, and the people who don't have to come to work every day and are able to work remotely as they see fit are predominantly male, simply because that's the way things stack up in the profession? I think it's going to be awfully hard to do anything about that, but it's a potential, it's a source of potential friction. When you stratify occupations this way, you make it less likely that people are going to get promoted or advance from lower level positions into higher level positions because they're not in contact with those people. They don't see what they're doing. They don't have opportunities for mentorship. So this is a problem that we're going to have to address proactively to the extent that we can. I think right now what we're doing is we're simply trying to be aware of the problem and think about it.
Another question, Stephen, touches on liability, and the person asking it happened to focus on liability for the employer between employees, but I suppose it could also happen for a credit union in this case from somebody walking into the lobby or sitting down across the desk for a loan application, or someone in a store of some sort or any kind of establishment. And so the question has to do with, and once there are masses of people vaccinated, but there are still that concentration of people that have chosen not to get vaccinated. Maybe they're wearing masks, maybe they're not. But does the employer or the business owner or whatever it is, have any risk of exposure or liability from a claim, theoretically at least, by one employee claiming that, I've been exposed to, much less I got infected by, this other employee that, like in your examples here, wasn't wearing the mask correctly or didn't get tested when he or she said she did, and those kinds of things. Or, someone that sat down across the desk from a loan officer, another credit union example, claiming that same kind of thing and those kinds of things. And that perhaps has happened, over the course of the past year, but I'm not sure, like you said, on other things that has gotten into progressed to the court resolution kind of level as of yet.
I have encountered exactly this problem with one of my clients. I mean, not exactly, but very, very, very similar. There's it's a business that's open to the public, and they have signs up that say if you're going to come on our premises, you have to be wearing a mask and you have to observe social distancing. And there was this guy who doesn't believe, he calls it the plandemic. He doesn't think it's real. He thinks it's a hoax. And he thinks it's a matter of his personal liberty, that he shouldn't have to wear a mask if he doesn't want to wear a mask. And he got it in his mind that he has a right to go wherever he wants without wearing a mask, and that it's a civil right, and that he's being discriminated against if he's not allowed to do that. And so he came onto my client's premises, and when the employees confronted him and told him he had to wear a mask or he had to leave, he became very belligerent, and they had to call the police on him. And we had to get a temporary restraining order, no trespass order, to prevent him from coming onto the company's premises, which he then engaged in a social media campaign of threatening everybody involved in this, which became a second issue for law enforcement. But ultimately, to your point, it was an issue of protecting our employees, right? And because they were being harassed by this guy, and they were being put in a situation that was unsafe. He was not respecting social distancing. He was deliberately and belligerently not respecting social distancing, and he was verbally abusive. And it was a situation where if the company hadn't done something to try to protect those employees, they wouldn't have been fulfilling their legal duty to provide their employees with a safe work environment. But by taking that position, they exposed themselves and other members of the staff now to a secondary kind of campaign of harassment by this guy, who's now decided that he's going to go after everybody, or at least threaten to go after everybody. In fact, including me. I got threatened by him too, who is participating in this campaign of depriving him of his God-given right to walk around without a mask on. And it wasn't just our business. There were a couple of other businesses where the police got involved. And so this is going to continue to be an issue. And because there is a significant percentage of our population who feels that way. And, they absolutely agree with his position that it's a hoax. It's something that is being foisted on us by a leftist government that's simply trying to control every aspect of our lives, and our patriotic duty is to resist. And there's people that feel that way, and they have a constitutional right to feel that way and to express their opinions. But what they don't have a constitutional right to do is to enter onto private property where the owner of the property doesn't want them there. And there are the public accommodations laws, but you're allowed to, you don't have to accommodate somebody who's being disruptive, right, and who's being abusive and threatening to your employees. You don't have to allow that person to be on your business premises simply because you're open to the public. But he's claiming that I don't think he has actually the resources to file a lawsuit, but he's threatening to file a lawsuit for violation. That we're not accommodating. That basically it's a First Amendment issue, that he's engaged in freedom of expression. And he's allowed to do that, and we're only allowed to put reasonable restrictions on that, and not allowing him to come on the premises at all is not reasonable. But we're going to see these claims. I think they are going to become, who knows, are they going to become less problematic or more so when more people are vaccinated? I mean, I don't know. I can kind of see it both ways, but
So the problem is, isn't it, that you're not going to be able to tell, when the state of emergency in Vermont is lifted, let's say it's sometime this summer, maybe, everybody's going to be walking around looking the same. So how are you going to know who's vaccinated and
you're not.
And who's not, right?
You're not. I mean, there's, this is why we really depend a lot on our public health officials to figure out, what's the best balance and when is it time to completely, because you can't, you can't monitor your neighbors. You can't know what's going on with everybody else. So it is a public health issue. And at some point, the public health authorities are going to decide that the risk is low enough that we're just going to start mingling with each other like the way we, you see movies and now and pictures of things that were happening a year and a half ago, and you go, oh my God, look how close everybody was together. Nobody's wearing any masks. And, I gotta believe, there's going to come a time in the not too distant future when we're going to be doing that again, and, but it's going to require people, cooperating with the public health measures that are being put in place to try to get us to that point. And there are some people who just aren't going to. And so I think we've almost used up our time. So are there any other questions that?
There's one I got by email that's not in the chat box, Stephen, and it goes all the way back to your initial discussion about requiring vaccines of employees. You referencing that yes, legally you can, but perhaps philosophically you shouldn't. But then the question has to do with what about going forward? Is it going to be okay to have on the employment application, for example, that question that says, have you been vaccinated against COVID-19, or I suppose it could say against the flu as well, or whatever else. Will you be able to hire or not based on that?
I think the answer to that question is technically yes. But again, you're going to have to accommodate. You can't have just a blanket, rule. If you're going to have that rule, you have to accommodate genuine religious expression, and you have to accommodate people with genuine medical conditions. And, if you're going to have that rule, are you really going to enforce it? And are you really going to enforce it uniformly? Because if you don't, you're going to have somebody saying, the only people that you're enforcing this vaccine requirement on are white people, males, whatever. That you're not enforcing it uniformly, and so you're discriminating based on the way that you're enforcing this rule. So, when I question, it's not really a philosophical question as to whether you should do it. It's a practical question about, if you're going to do it, how are you going to do it? And how are you going to do it in a way that avoids these pitfalls? Are you, if you're going to require vaccines, are you really going to fire people who refuse to get them without a good reason? And if you're really not going to do that, maybe you don't want to pretend that you are, and maybe instead you want to have a policy that encourages vaccines, but doesn't require.
Thank you. Hey, we are closing in on the hour. Other questions or comments or observations from anybody for Stephen?
This has been helpful. Thank you.
Good. It's nice to see you all.